Hello students, we have completed with two processes which are occurring in the plants such as absorption of water by roots and transpiration. Now let us continue with the next process which occurs in the plants known as photosynthesis. I think children, you are familiar with this word right from your primary classes, and within the word you have a meaning of this process, such as photo refers to light and synthesis refers to production or manufacturing of glucose, which is converted into starch in the plants. So let us start with this chapter. So how do we define this word photosynthesis? In fact, before we could define the word, let me write the equation that represents photosynthesis. So based on this equation, you can define the entire process. So we can see that on the reactant side, I have written carbon dioxide along with water, and just above the arrow mark, I will write sunlight followed by chlorophyll, and on the product side, there is a glucose, oxygen and water molecule which has been reformed in the course of photosynthesis. And children, this is an equation that you have to learn, and when you learn this equation it has to be well balanced, and this is one of the expected question. So they can ask you, write the chemical equation to represent the photosynthesis, where you are going to write the balanced equation. So it is going to be 6 molecules of carbon dioxide followed by 12 molecules of water in the presence of sunlight followed by chlorophyll. You get 1 molecule of a glucose, 6 molecules of oxygen followed by 6 molecules of water are formed on the product side. So how do we define this process? Children, pay attention. Even if you miss out one keyword, you will be losing the entire 1 mark. So just recall this equation and write the definition. Yes. So photosynthesis is a process in which plants absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and absorb water with the help of their roots. In the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll, they synthesize glucose and liberate oxygen as one of the product. Okay, so you have to write all these words whenever you define the word. Fine. Instead of chlorophyll, you can also mention it as a green plants, but there should be carbon dioxide word, water, sunlight and chlorophyll. Along with that, you can write it as a glucose or as a starch, because many number of glucose molecules undergo polymerization. They react with each other forming a giant molecule that is a starch. Also you can write it along with liberation of oxygen. Fine. Now, what is the importance of photosynthesis to the entire living world? So within the equation you have the answer for that. So we can say that it provides food to the entire living world. So what is the significance or the importance of the photosynthesis? It provides food for all. Now let us consider one of the food chain there are number of a food chain. What do you mean by food chain? So you can say that it's a series of organisms represented in particular chain where food is transferred from one organism to the other organism, right? Now let us take an example of one particular food chain. So plants are eaten by herbivores and herbivores are consumed or eaten by the carnivores, and after the death of herbivores and carnivores, they are decomposed or fed upon by the decomposers like bacteria and fungi. So if you look at this food chain, the herbivores, which only feed on the plants, directly consume the food, or you can say that they directly depend on the plants for their food. Whereas carnivores are the animals which feed on the flesh of the other animals. So they eat the herbivores. So indirectly you can say that they depend on the plants for their food. Right? So you can say that herbivores directly depend on the plants for their food, whereas carnivores, by consuming the herbivores, they depend on the plants indirectly for their food. In the same way, the decomposers, or what we call them as a scavengers like bacteria and fungi, they feed on herbivores and carnivores. Again, they get their energy or food by feeding on these organisms, or you can say again they indirectly depend on the plants for their food. So finally you can conclude that thus plants, being the autotrophs, provide food to the entire living world. Then along with the food, they also provide a respiratory gas, that is oxygen, which is required by all the living organisms for the cellular respiration to liberate energy in the form of ATP. Okay, we know that glucose. So when we consume the food, glucose undergoes oxidation, liberating carbon dioxide, water, followed by energy in the form of ATP. And this currency of the cell provides energy for various metabolic activities that we take up in our day-to-day life activities. Or you can say that including plant themselves, this oxygen is required by all the organisms on this earth for their cellular respiration. So thus the photosynthesis process provides food to the entire living world, followed by oxygen for cellular respiration. Okay, now what makes the plants to carry out photosynthesis? What is a speciality which cannot be taken up by the animals or a heterotrophs? The plants have a pigment, that is a chlorophyll, which actually takes part in absorbing the sunlight, which enables the plant to carry out this chemical reaction in their body. Where exactly they carry out photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is carried out in a cell organelle known as a chloroplast. So chloroplasts are the cell organelles which actually comprise chlorophyll to take part in photosynthesis. So Where do we find the chloroplasts? So there are many locations. Let me list it out. We find the chloroplasts in the guard cells of stomata. Because of which even the guard cells carry out photosynthesis, thereby which helps in opening and closing of stoma. So we also find the chloroplasts in the mesophyll cells of the leaf. So what is the meaning of mesophyll cells? Recall the chapter Transpiration. If you remember, I had taught you that there is a upper epidermis, lower epidermis. In between the upper epidermis and lower epidermis, we find the parenchyma cells, okay, such as a palisade parenchyma cells followed by a spongy parenchyma cells. So these cells are known as the mesophyll cells of the leaf. So we find the chloroplasts in the palisade parenchyma cells or a spongy parenchyma cells. Then we also find it in the on the young green stem, especially when the plant is very young. In the case of seedling or a sapling, when the stem remains green in color, even in that case we find the chloroplast in the green color young stems on their surface. So these are the various locations, or you can also say it as it is found in the cytoplasm of plant cell, especially the green plant cell. So these are the various locations. So anything can be written when they ask you about the location of the chloroplasts. Fine. And then these chloroplasts, especially they are located in the palisade parenchyma cells, which are very close to the upper epidermis. So within one single palisade parenchyma cells, you may find around 50 to 60 chloroplasts, which are close to the upper epidermis. This is because it is easier for the chloroplasts to absorb maximum sunlight to carry out photosynthesis. Let us study about the structure of the chloroplasts. As I said earlier, chloroplast is a oval body which is oval in its shape, a minute structure, and this cell organelle is a double membranous cell organelle. So this is a diagram expected for about 3 marks. You should practice. So I said this is a double membranous organelle comprising 2 membranes, which can be named as a outer and inner membrane. Within this double membranous structure, we find a flattened disc-like structure or a coin-like structure, and this coin-like structure is known as a thylakoid. So, in fact, there are pile of thylakoids which are arranged one above the other. So, you may find several pile of thylakoids in the entire chloroplast, and single pile of thylakoids is collectively known as granum. So what is a granum? Granum is nothing but a pile of thylakoids. So all the granum collectively known as grana. So grana is the plural form, granum is the singular form. Okay, and all these granum are interconnected to each other by a tubular structures known as a frets. Then within this thylakoid, so in each disc-like structure or a thylakoid, in the inner walls, in the inner wall we find a pigment, that is chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is found in the inner walls of the thylakoid, and this chlorophyll is made up of a number of elements such as carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen and magnesium, which makes up a complex structure that traps the sunlight to carry out photosynthesis. And this granum is embedded, or it is found in a ground substance. It is found in a matrix, and the matrix of the chloroplast is known as stroma. I think children, you are familiar with the word stroma of the RBCs. Here we call this ground substance as a stroma of the chloroplasts, which comprises starch granules. You may find lipid droplets in the stroma. So thus you can say that a chloroplast comprises outer membrane, inner membrane, which is an oval body comprising granum, and a ground substance known as a stroma. So children, whenever they ask you to draw this diagram, remember the shape is observed carefully by the examiner, and all the parts must be labeled, and especially you have to represent both the membranes very clearly. Now, chlorophyll is found in the inner walls of the thylakoids. In fact, there are 9 different varieties of chlorophyll molecules. Though there are 9 varieties, in fact, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B are the 2 prominent types which actually take part in the photosynthesis. So these are the 2 types which actually absorb the maximum sunlight to carry out photosynthesis. And why the leaves are green in color? When chlorophyll is exposed to the visible light. What is the meaning of visible light? The visible light comprises the colors, what we write it as a Vibgayar. So it is made up of 7 different colors. So when a chlorophyll molecule is exposed to the visible light, which comprises all these colors, the chlorophyll absorbs the wavelength of 2 colors such as blue followed by red color, which are almost found at the extreme ends of the visible light. So these 2 wavelengths are absorbed by the chlorophyll, and it emits the green color, or you can say it reflects the green color, and because of that reflection of the green color, it actually appears as a green color. So this can be an expected reason why the leaves are green in color. So when chlorophyll on exposure to the visible light, it absorbs the blue and red color wavelengths which are found almost at the extreme ends of the visible light and reflects the green light. Hence the leaves are green in color. Right? Then, just like our rhodopsin and iodopsin, I can say that even this chlorophyll is a highly sensitive pigment which is stimulated by the sunlight, and it is such a sensitive pigment. Even for the formation of chlorophyll, the plants must be exposed to the sunlight, otherwise chlorophyll is not synthesized in those plant cells. Right? So probably you would have seen the grass which is grown under the shade of the tree, after some time you may find that grass turning yellow. It turns yellow. So what is the reason for this? So in this case, the old chlorophyll would have undergone disintegration. What is the meaning of that? So even if the earlier chlorophyll which was found in the grass, and that old chlorophyll, since it is not exposed to the sunlight, the chlorophyll will undergo disintegration and there is no formation of new chlorophyll also, or you can say there is a non-formation of new chlorophyll and the earlier old chlorophyll will undergo disintegration. So again you can expect this as a give reason question in the board examination, where I have to use these two phrases. You can say that since the leaves are not exposed to the sunlight, there is no formation of chlorophyll because it requires the sunlight to carry out the synthesis of chlorophyll, and old chlorophyll which was found on the earlier days also undergoes breaking down, or you can say disintegration, which makes the leaf or the grass turning into yellow. Fine, children. Now, if you remember the transpiration process, during the day the stomata are kept open to carry out photosynthesis. Why is it so? It's because during the day the sunlight is available for the plants so that they absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through the stomata. So in the course of absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, as the stomata are kept open, they also lose water in the form of water vapor by transpiration. Okay, so hence you can say that transpiration is the price. Transpiration is the price the plant pays for the photosynthesis. It means we know that photosynthesis is one of the useful process. Of course, synthesizes glucose and liberates oxygen. Along with that, transpiration also to some extent helps the plant for cooling their body, conduction of water, that we have discussed in the earlier classes. But since the stomata are kept open during the day, especially for the inward diffusion of carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, so since the stomata are kept open, at the same time they lose water in the form of water vapor by transpiration. So indirectly you can say that it is a great loss to the plants. So thus you can say that transpiration is the price the plant pays for the photosynthesis, because both the processes occur simultaneously. So there is an inward diffusion of carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, and there is an outward diffusion of water in the form of water vapor from those palisade parenchyma cells, or it escapes from that substomatal space. Fine. So let us quickly learn about the structure of stomata. Fine, children. So this is also one more diagram expected. Yes. So we know that stomata comprises two guard cells, and as we know that the inner guard cells are, especially the inner walls of the guard cells are thicker and the outer walls are thinner. So it is also a double membranous cell. Okay, so the inner walls are facing a opening, and the opening is known as stoma. The opening is known as a stoma, or you can say the aperture is known as a stoma, right? So these are the inner thick walls, then outer thin walls, right? So just like any other plant cell, we find the large vacuole in the guard cells. We find the nucleus in the guard cells along with cytoplasm, and they also enclose a number of chloroplasts. Okay, so you can label this part as a vacuole, nucleus, cytoplasm, and children, whenever you draw the guard cells, you should also draw the adjoining epidermal cells. So without the epidermal cells, the guard cells cannot function. So whenever they ask you the diagram, you should draw the guard cells surrounded by the epidermal cells, otherwise you will be losing the marks. So you can label it as a epidermal cells. And just now I said that the guard cells open during the day and close at night. So you can say that one of the important factor that enables the stomata to open during the day is the presence of sunlight. So due to the presence of a sunlight during the day, they absorb carbon dioxide and carry out photosynthesis. Hence the stomata must be kept open during the day. So at night the stomata are closed, as there is an absence of sunlight. They do not carry out photosynthesis. So just like us, they also take in oxygen from the atmosphere for their cellular respiration. Now, quickly, let us learn about opening and closing of stomata, which is based on the potassium concentration theory. Potassium concentration theory. What do you mean by potassium ion concentration theory? In fact, in the guard cells, during photosynthesis, they synthesize the ATP, which I'll be teaching in the later video. In one of the steps of the photosynthesis known as a light reaction, they synthesize ATP. And due to the generation of ATP during photosynthesis, the potassium ions which are found in the adjoining cells, they move inward. They move inward during the day. So there is an inward movement of potassium ions during the day because there is a generation of ATP during photosynthesis, or you can say that the concentration of potassium ions in the guard cells increase during the day. And of course, children, you know that potassium ions are nothing but the solutes. So just recall about the solution what we have learned in the earlier chapter. Solutes along with the solvent mix up the solution, right? So again in the guard cells there is a solution which has more number of potassium ions or more number of solutes, which leads to the condition known as a hypertonic condition or a hypertonic solution. So thus in the guard cells there is a hypertonic solution because of the high amount of potassium ions which move inward into the guard cells from the surrounding epidermal cells. So because of the hypertonic condition, there is a less water and more solutes, thereby water from the epidermal cells, water from the neighboring cells moves into the guard cells by endosmosis, thereby the guard cells become turgid, the vacuole enlarges, volume of vacuole increases, thereby the outer thinner walls, that is a specialty which will be pushed out. So automatically the inner thick walls which are already curved or which are already arched become more arched, thereby opening the stoma during the day. So thus the guard cells are kept open during the day because of this potassium concentration which increases in the guard cells, whereas at night there is no photosynthesis occurring in the guard cells in the absence of a sunlight. Hence there is no synthesis of ATP, so no ATP production, and since there is no ATP formation, the potassium ions move from guard cells into the surrounding neighboring cells. So then they move from a guard cells into the surrounding neighboring cells. So you can say that the concentration of solute will be more now in the guard cells compared to in the surrounding epidermal cells than the guard cells. So guard cells will have a less potassium ions, or you can say it has a more water compared to the surrounding neighboring cells. So in the neighboring cells the concentration of potassium ions will be more. So in that case the guard cells will attain a condition known as a hypotonic condition, or you can say that there is a hypotonic solution in the guard cells at night because of no synthesis of ATP and outward movement of potassium ions to the neighboring cells. So the guard cells will have lot of water, due to which now they lose water to the epidermal cells. So when they lose water to the epidermal cells, automatically we know that the guard cells become now flaccid. They become flaccid. Okay, the vacuole shrinks. There is a loss of water, and inner thicker walls, now they become straightened. Thereby closing the stoma at night. So thus you can say that the presence of potassium ions in the guard cells or in the epidermal cells indicates the opening and closing of stomata. Is it clear? So along with this, there is one more theory given, that is a glucose or a starch concentration theory, which is not in the syllabus, but I have taught you in the transpiration chapter. So with this, we complete about the structure of stomata. Thank you.